Oh, hi there! Long time no see. Or is it? I don't really know. That's the magic of writing a script. You start without really knowing when you will be done. Welcome to Real Quick, where I talk about a few games that I played recently in the most concise way I can muster. I explain the basic premise of the game, then tell you why I recommend it, and then a couple of things you should know about before going in. Sounds cool? Hopefully you just nodded. Let's get started. So today, as an appetizer, we're actually going to forego the violence and mayhem that tend to be so prevalent in video games to talk about a neat little game that has honestly been making my life easier lately. Dorfromantik is a puzzle game developed and published by Toucan Interactive, where your goal is to create beautiful landscapes by placing hexagonal tiles on a blank canvas. Tiles come from a limited pile that is randomly generated at the start of the game, with each of their sides composed of a variety of landscape features such as villages or trees. Placing a tile nets you points towards your overall score. The better placed a tile is, meaning the more sides match their surroundings, the more points you will get. The session ends once you run out of tiles, which you can replenish by completing quests that randomly appear in your stack. These can be quite challenging, sometimes requiring you to place an exact amount of elements to complete, for example 10 houses, no more, no less. That's essentially the game, the main goal of it being the timeless gaming ambition of beating your own high score and completing challenges. There are also a couple other modes, including creative mode, where there's no time limit and you gain access to more tools to craft your landscapes, and the hard mode with fewer quests available and more complex tile configurations. Dorfromantik is an exceptionally relaxing game to play. Now, this may not resonate as strongly if you're a younger gamer in your teens or early 20s, but as a 30-year-old greybeard who can already feel all the pressure of adult life, sometimes it is nice to play games that truly allow me to blank my mind and disconnect. I may have ruined that for myself, which we'll get to in a minute, but that is essentially the basic gist of the game. The beautiful, minimalistic visuals combined with the soothing soundtrack make it very easy to disconnect, and think solely on placing tiles and creating landscapes. There's an assortment of challenges that you'll slowly complete as you play, which reward you with new kinds of tiles and different biomes that you can toggle between. Placing tiles correctly requires you to put a little thought, both on your available and upcoming tiles and also on the current and future layout of your landscape. There is no time limit, so there is very little pressure in making your next move and it being the correct one. That is, unless you care about your high score. If you intend to follow my recommendation and give this game a try, do yourself a favor and don't try to get good at this game, just play it. YouTuber Gameplay Archive has a series of videos where he amasses an insane score of 1,000,000 points. He does so in 28 sessions of 3 hours each. I recommend you live vicariously through him and do not attempt it at home. I'll link his playlist in the description below. I don't know, there's simply something about this game that I keep coming back to at times. When I was a kid, I remember seeing my mom playing Mahjong or Solitaire, and I was always like, I don't get it, mom, why don't you play some Call of Duty and get some sick 360 no-scopes or something? But now I think I do get it. Dorfromantik might just end up being my Solitaire, and my kids will randomly walk up to me either doing this or this. And now for some stuff you should know about before going in. Not necessarily bad things, rather things I think you should be aware of to have an informed perspective on a possible purchase. The first and most important one is that Dorfromantik is not a city builder. This might sound like a no-brainer to you, but the game is sometimes referred to as a city builder online, and it is tagged as such on the Steam page. But the reality is that this is a puzzle game through and through. You won't be managing resources or the happiness of your people, nothing like that. There's only the tiles and where you place them. Another thing to keep in mind is what I mentioned earlier about the high score and challenges. If you decide to go for this type of play, well, for one, the game will not be as relaxing as it can be, which is kinda the point. But there is also quite a bit of luck and RNG required to play the game quote-unquote correctly. What tiles you get and in which order, as well as whether or not you get quests, is completely random and can be a bit annoying if you're going for the high score. I'm also not the biggest fan of how the game incentivizes grouping kinds of tiles together for efficient quest completion, giving you a finished landscape that looks a bit more artificial than what you would maybe do in creative mode. It is true that the competitive way to play a game will be a largely different experience from casual, except if you play Rainbow Six Siege, so this isn't really an issue. The game remains a very enjoyable experience regardless of how you play it. And that was Dorfromantik. I got it on a sale and really enjoy it. It is also available on Nintendo Switch if you feel like landscaping on the go. Now, let's move on to more depressing things. Chernobylite is a sci-fi survival game developed by the Farm 51. As you could probably guess, the game takes place in the surrounding areas of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine, where a paramilitary force has taken control of the zone to carry out shady experiments. You play as Igor, a former Soviet scientist who used to live in Pripyat right before the disaster and lost his wife. A couple of decades later, Igor begins to see his wife Tatiana in dreams, beckoning him to return to Chernobyl, and so begins our adventure. Officially, Chernobylite is a survival game, but the complete package is a little harder to place in a definitive category. The game starts off with a very narratively heavy and linear intro, which at first led me to think that this is what this game was, a linear shooter. You're then introduced to the base building mechanic, which plays like a more basic version of the one in Fallout 4, and I did not expect it at all. I had no idea and it took me completely by surprise. Right after that, you move on to the first of the freeform missions you can embark on, and the gameplay loop is finally complete and revealed to you. For now. The reason why I said that this game is hard to define in a category is because it surprises you with new mechanics from time to time. You probably heard the phrase more than meets the eye. Well, it is appropriate for Chernobylite. My first playthrough must have taken me about 16 hours, and I would say that right until the very end the game was throwing me curveballs in the form of new mechanics. You think this is a linear shooter? Bam! Base building and crafting. You think it's a survival shooter? Bam! Companions and their needs. You can no longer think of a definitive genre for the game? Bam! Narrative choices that impact the progression and the ending. The game, being a veritable salad of gameplay elements, doesn't always work, and I'll explain why in a minute, but it does lead to an undeniably interesting experience that keeps you engaged and entertained. Now, let's explain why I think you should give this game a shot. My favorite aspect of Chernobylite is by far the setting and the characters. Starting with the exclusion zone itself, this is probably the best recreation of this place ever put in a video game. I'm sorry Stalker, you are as a whole one of my favorite gaming experiences ever, but the team behind Chernobylite did a tremendous job as well. They developed an environment scanning tool that they then used when visiting the area, and the results are quite impressive. You can check out part of the making of the game in the dev's YouTube channel, they have quite a few videos of the sort. Despite all levels having the same Eastern Bloc post-apocalyptic visual design, they each end up feeling unique thanks to a combination of real-world landmarks, supernatural occurrences, and narrative events like random NPC encounters. It also helps quite a bit that the game looks very good. Like a lot of modern games, the lighting is doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and when that is missing, things can look a bit stale. But this was a company town that ended up inhospitable and deserted. Looking stale is kinda the gist. The game is also not afraid to lean into the visual aspect of the supernatural part of this narrative with impressive results. Being accompanied on your journey by the great soundtrack composed by Mikołaj Stroiński is just the icing on the cake. As you progress through the game, you'll encounter and recruit a handful of colorful characters, each with their own backstory, beliefs, and reasons for joining you. They each also have a particular set of skills that not only come to play during the finale, but can also be taught to Igor as he levels up. I really like the way the game handles these little training sessions. This could all have been a menu where you unlock skills and that's it, but instead it is taken as a moment to sort of bond with your companions and hear them explain to you what they know.
Уметь использовать аптечку, лечебные мази и травы важно, никто не спорит, но я буду говорить не об этом.
А о чем тогда?
О решимости, мужестве и целеустремленности.
Your team also have their own needs that need fulfillment. Your base needs to have places for everyone to sleep and food for everyone to munch on. Going heavy on the industrial and crafting side of things will lower overall comfort, which leads to stressed out party members, which in turn can cause them to fail missions, be captured, or outright killed. Companions can also abandon the team if they feel like you don't appreciate them enough. Losing a companion is a huge blow to your playthrough, as everyone has a part to play in the final missions, the mechanics of which I won't spoil here. I'll just say that being prepared and knowing things matters more than being a mean killing machine. That includes having all your party members with you playing their respective roles. The cast of characters that form your team and the mechanics by which you learn where their moral compass points and the past situations that led them to be that way reminded me a lot of Mass Effect 2. Each time you finish a mission, you return to your base in the evening for a sort of end of the day session, where you can drop off loot, craft things for the next day, and most importantly, talk to everyone in your base to see if they have something new to tell you. I found the companions to be a very interesting bunch of individuals with similar overall goals but very different ideas as to how to achieve them. Hearing their stories as they slowly open up to you and confronting them when it's time to make difficult choices was definitely one of the highlights of the game. The binary choices that are presented to you might eventually cause a party member to abandon the cause, but the game thankfully has an interesting mechanic to stop that from being overwhelming. I won't spoil it here because it comes as one of the surprises I mentioned earlier, but just so you know, taking a wrong narrative turn isn't the end of the world. I compare it to one of the best games of all time, but that isn't to say everyone here is as memorable as the crew of the Normandy. Of the 5 party members, I really liked and enjoyed talking to 2 of them, and I found the remaining 3 to be the biggest pieces of shit, but interesting to listen to nonetheless. Actually, I would venture that all 5 of them are more interesting than both Kaiden and Jacob. I also quite like the supernatural elements of the story, particularly the bits with Tatiana. Seeing a ghost of your dead wife might sound like the tropiest trope, but Chernobylite thankfully gives it a unique spin. Tatiana isn't interested only in haunting you and guiding you to the endgame, but also serves to give the player a lot of real-life context regarding the incident and its effect on the various areas surrounding the power plant.
Весь мир обрушился на детей, хотя они даже не успели его толком узнать. Иногда мне кажется, что души этих детей так отсюда и не ушли, что они в куклах, смотрят и ждут.
If you are at all interested in this grim episode of history, if you played Stalker and liked it, or if you watched the HBO series and liked it, hell, even if you only played that Modern Warfare mission and liked it, this game is a must-play just for the authenticity of the environments and the narrative context alone. Also, crazy slab antics. Now, let's move on to less ideal aspects of this game. As far as my personal experience goes, there are 2 main issues with Chernobylite's gameplay design that you should be aware of, with the main one being repetition. Chernobylite's main gameplay loop is waking up, sending companions and Igor himself on missions, completing an objective, and then, or before that, exploring the levels to find investigation clues, materials and items to help you on your journey, or situations to nope out of. Nope. Once you feel like you're done, you Rick Sanchez your way back to base and go to bed to finish the day. The missions you select when the day begins can be the kind that progress the story or just gather supplies and materials. Before I felt like I was ready for the ending, I spent 34 days in the zone, for a total of 16 hours of gameplay, of which I'd say about 13 or so were filled with new and interesting things to see and do. For the final 3, however, I kinda just powered through because I felt like I had seen everything I could in each of the 7 levels the game has to offer. Part of the issue, I think, is that the game is clearly designed for harder difficulties. I tend to do a first playthrough of every game I play on normal difficulty, and in the case of Chernobylite, you become way overpowered about halfway through. In such a way that it feels like the game has more tools than challenges to offer, if that makes any sense. To properly explain what I mean, we need to talk about the mixture of gameplay elements that form the core experience of Chernobylite, because as you can probably expect from such combinations, not all of them mesh well together. Let's start with Igor's bars. He has 2 of them, Health and Psyche. Health works like you expect it to, with the cool twist of using Fallout 4's approach to radiation. Then there's Psyche, representing your character's mental health. Killing enemies and being exposed to horrors beyond your comprehension lower it. Running out of it gradually kills you. However, Igor is a dude with an iron will, and all he needs to get back into the fray is to get drunk or inhale some salts. This means that you can commit all the war crimes you want, and that as long as you have some vodka or aromatic salts at hand, you will be totally fine. Psyche is supposedly one of the things that should push you to take the stealth route and avoid confrontation, but it is very easy to go wild and keep it under control. This issue is further compounded by enemies being resource piñatas. If your aim is good and you can drop them without taking too much damage, it is always a net positive to channel your inner Doomslayer and leave no one alive. Since finishing the game, I have started anew in the hardest difficulty, and while I can confirm that these issues are not as prevalent, because combat is harder and resources are more scarce, it doesn't change the fact that it feels a bit off and probably could have used some more time in the oven. Maybe make it so that companions react to your methods, or that it affects the progression of the narrative. As it stands, it's just the psyche bar and keeping it full. A similar thing happens with companion needs at your base. Some things are well thought out. For example, crafting things that require electricity will also require you to build generators. This in turn lowers the quality of the air, for which you will need a filtration system that also requires electricity. The problem is that you also have companion comfort in your base. Basically, everything that isn't for resting or leisure lowers comfort. Low companion comfort takes a toll on their psyche and makes them prone to failing missions or worse. Just like Igor's own psyche, however, this is just a mathematical issue. And as long as you have enough comfy points to balance out all the other things, everything is fine. You can build a sofa and a table with a nice TV on it, or you can just build several TVs on the floor. The result is the same. While it does give you the freedom to solve your issues really fast, in case you're not very interested in this part of the gameplay, it also feels like there could be ways of making things more interesting. Those were my two biggest gripes with the game. It can get a little janky sometimes, which you should also be aware of, but I usually don't mind these things personally. In fact, I find them very amusing. That's just me personally. I'll take a little bit of jank with some cool ideas behind it over a well-polished, boring AAA experience any day of the week. But you should probably know it does get a little silly sometimes. Oh, and the game uses TAA as a post-processing method. I don't know, if you like games for reasons other than them being fun or entertaining, if you like seeing developers fool around with different ideas, if you, like me, tend to look at games through the lens of how interesting they are rather than just the quality of their making, then you will enjoy Chernobylite. I paid around $15 for it, and in retrospect I wouldn't have minded paying 20 or so. The game goes on sale often for that price, so give it a try. Okay, let's move on to more violent things. Just like I did in my previous video of this kind, I've saved my favorite game for last. Cultic is a retro first-person shooter informally known as a boomer shooter, designed to mimic the look and feel of a 90s game while taking advantage of certain modern technologies. I love this game, mostly because it's pretty good, but also because it bears the honor of being the game that has gotten me into boomer shooters. For a few years now, these games have been getting more prevalent, and by the looks of public opinion, most of them are pretty good. However, I was pretty hesitant to try any of them out because I didn't know how much of it was based around nostalgia. Me being a person born in the 90s, you would assume that I am a prime target for these games. But the reality is that, like many people who got their start in PC gaming when they were young, I just kinda played where my dad played. So it was all mostly RTS games like Age of Empires and Ground Control, tactical things like SWAT 3, and even weird things like Evolva. Yes, this is a real game. In the 90s you could make a game about genetically engineered space park rangers that looked made out of Play-Doh, and people would just play it. My baptism of fire with first-person shooters didn't come until Medal of Honor Allied Assault came out and changed my life, forever turning me into the bloodthirsty goblin of a gamer that I am today. So while I admit to being wowed by the trailers of basically every single boomer shooter, I wasn't crazy about them either. That is, until I decided to give Cultic a go. Turns out, the game is very cool, let me tell you why. First thing I like about this game, the atmosphere. Cultic has you playing as a disgraced detective who was investigating the recent rise of violent happenings in his county. Being let go from the case for meddling too much, he instead decides to investigate on his own. When his clues take him to an abandoned asylum, he is attacked by an unseen assailant. Next thing you know, you wake up in a mass grave. You should be dead but you're not, and now it's time to stop the people who did this to you by any means necessary. I love this shit. It takes the usual story of a detective going in too deep and uncovering a conspiracy and gives it a supernatural spin. From the moment your character wakes up, there are no more proper procedures or doing things by the book. Now it's time to throw hatchets at people. The feeling evoked by the game's setting reminded me a lot of Resident Evil 4, but with the Doomslayer instead of Leon, and with a more satanic panic vibe. With the lack of cutscenes and dialogue, Cultic instead uses its level design to show the insidious nature of the cult and its spread from the point of origin. Metaphorically speaking, you start the game at the outer layer of the onion of corruption and slowly peel towards the center to reveal the conspiracy and its causes. Cultic would also not be a game I like if I didn't talk about how great the soundtrack is. Most of it feels oppressive at first, like something creepy and sad is happening, but then a weird sort of sense of commitment starts to seep into the tracks. That's the music telling you that horrible things are happening, but someone has to do something about it. That someone is you, and that something is killing everyone involved. I'm listening to it as I write the script and it's really good. Just like the game, the music is the work of a single developer, which makes the whole package more impressive. Combat feels very good. It's fast-paced and offers some nice alternatives to just shooting things in the head. Most objects in the game can be picked up and flung at your enemies. From a common chair to an explosive barrel or a lantern, clearing a room full of enemies by shooting them in the head is one thing, doing so by throwing shit at them like a chimp is a different feeling altogether. I particularly love the hatchet. The default melee weapon of the game can be thrown if you carry more than one, and landing headshots with it is very satisfactory. There's even an achievement for doing long shots with it. That's what I'm talking about! Projectile weapons also feel great to use. Sound effects are on point. Enemy death animations are over the top, and I have to shine a light specifically on the weapon animations, because they are stellar too. I love that the pistol is a Mauser C96. The developer could have chosen any magazine-fed pistol, but purposely chose one with a very intricate reload process, and then animated it beautifully. The things you shoot at are also a highlight of the game. Enemy variety is very good, and just like you, they are not content with just using firearms. From the lowly hatchet-wielding cultist to flame troopers and shield bearers, enemies are very good at keeping you on your toes. There are also special enemies, but these have introductions in the form of mini boss fights that I won't spoil here because they are a nice experience going in blind. Now let me make you aware of a couple of things you might consider shortcomings of this little game. First of all, the obvious one, the game's visuals are built around 2D sprites in a 3D world. This may not be to everyone's liking, and I must admit that I've never been one to go for retro things myself. But the more I play, the more I learn how to appreciate the artistry behind the sprites, and the many actions and movements they can convey with such quote-unquote little detail. If you like your games with the most graphical fidelity possible, then you might find Cultic unappealing. I will have to disagree with you if you think it looks any worse than awesome, but you are entitled to like it or not. Number 2, and perhaps more important, the current version available for purchase is called Cultic Chapter 1. Developer Jason Smith has already confirmed that Chapter 2 is in the works and will be sold as DLC for Chapter 1. You might be wondering if this means the game is technically early access. It very much isn't. This is a mechanically complete package. Nothing is missing gameplay wise as you would expect from an early access title. It's just the next narrative chapter that's coming at a later date with extra content. Chapter 1 took me around 6 hours to complete in normal difficulty, and I had such a blast that I'll probably be replaying it in a harder setting later. 6 hours may not sound like a lot of bang for your buck, but the game is priced accordingly at €10. If you're hungry for more than just a harder challenge, there are also many secrets to discover throughout the levels, and a neat survival mode which is surprisingly engaging. Honestly, if it were up to me, any game that's about killing things would come with a mandatory survival mode. Sometimes you just want to get in there and see how long you can last. I know I will be getting Chapter 2 as it comes out, but some people may not like the episodic nature of the releases and might choose to wait it out instead. And that's basically Cultic. Gritty atmosphere, smooth gameplay, detailed levels, great soundtrack, and most importantly, fun. So very happy to have another genre to look out for as well. Since getting Cultic, I've been on the prowl. Dusk, wishlisted. Hrot, wishlist. Is that how you say Hrot? Prodeus, wishlisted. Ultrakill, wishlisted. Selaco, wishlisted. Ion and Phantom Fury, wishlisted. And I'm sure I'm missing some more, so if you have any recommendations, give them to me down in the comments, please. Sorry for the delay as always. I was originally going to make a video about my first impressions of the upcoming competitive shooter The Finals, but then for reasons I had to divert course and... But what the hell, this video is kinda long already, so why don't I just tell you. I didn't finish my first impressions video for The Finals because I really didn't feel like playing it. Don't get me wrong, the first impressions would have been pretty good. The game is fun, looks great, just needed a very thorough balance pass. The thing here is that I'm too old for this shit. I probably would have played the crap out of The Finals in my early 20s or something, when I was basically addicted to competitive shooters. A lot of stress and anger later, however, I am simply over those kinds of games. They make me feel genuinely terrible. That isn't to say you shouldn't check out The Finals, cause like I said, I had a lot of fun and seems like it's going to be free to play anyway, so when it releases you can decide for yourself. And you know what? Fuck it. It's taken me too long to make this video to only recommend you a couple of games, so I'm just gonna suggest every good thing that I've watched in the last couple of months. Who says I can only talk about games? I watched Smiling Friends and it's great. You should watch it.
And this is Jeremy, your only form of hellish entertainment.
Dude, if you do that again, I'm gonna punch you. I'm not kidding.
I watched Evil Dead Rise and really liked it. I am officially part of the Deadite Ellie fan club.
Mom? Mommy's with the maggots now.
I watched Guardians 3 and it was delicious, finally some good MCU. My wife and I watched the final season of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and it is as marvelous as it promises.
There's something here about miming a whore tickling a man's testicles.
Oh, I did do
Yeah,
that.
she did. It was fucking funny.
And now I'm playing Fallout 76. Why, you ask? You know why. Are you not entertained? By the way, should I do quicker, real quick videos, as in about a single game? I'm still not sure about this grouping them together thing.
They're left here, towards Rhodes.
Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Consider liking and subscribing for more of these, game reviews and other stuff. I have to go now. I don't even have anything to say today, I just want to go to sleep.